Good morning. I'm the Reverend Dr. William L. Johnson III here with our morning meditation. Every week, we try to share these messages, and my preamble is always the same, there to inspire and encourage each of us as we're journeying through life. We don't know what we will encounter this week. We don't know what we will encounter today. But what we do know is that it's always helpful to have some encouragement in our bag, some inspiration in our heart, and even to have ourselves journeying with friends who know how to negotiate what's happening in our lives. So today's morning meditation is entitled Negotiating Our Now. Negotiating Our Now. Now, I want to begin our time together by simply saying I'm in a nostalgic mood. Yeah, I am. I have recently and lately been caught up in 1980s nostalgia. Yes, I was alive then. Yes, I was in high school then. Yes, I can remember all of the things that the 1980s brought our way. I remember seeing my first music video and the first music videos being created during that era. I remember the music from the 1980s. I remember the movies from the 1980s. And if those of you who are those who were around in the 1980s, you could be able to share with me, or you were tied into the culture, you remember that hip hop music kind of grabbed the nation by storm. You remember that in the midst of all that was happening in the 80s, Michael Jackson was at his highest with his Thriller videos and all the things that were happening there. You remember the love songs, Chicago, all of the rock bands that were there, Van Halen and others. You remember all the things that we discovered about ourselves as we grew. We did not have cell phones. We did not have personal computers. We had boom boxes, maybe with lots of batteries to put in it. And we remember Run DMC and LL Cool J and the Beastie Boys. We remember so much in our nostalgic moments. Sometimes I like to go back. I go back like Back to the Future when we remembered ourselves, and Michael J. Fox reminded us that you can go back and be all these things and replay your life. The 1980s reminds me of so much. The Top Gun movies and everything that came with it, sitcoms with an all-time high. We found ourselves negotiating the now then. But what do we do with the now? In a world in which it may not feel nostalgic, it may actually feel more challenging than anything else. What do we do with our now when we see wars on the brink, and when we discover that our nation may be pulling apart rather than coming together? What do we do with our now in the midst of challenges in our lives where we are going through our own personal changes, and our families are going through adaptations, and we are dealing with all that's happening? We're living with a pandemic that we've never had, and then overcoming it or getting around it or learning how to negotiate it. Negotiating our now is of eminent importance because it is important for us not simply to live in our past in nostalgic moments, but to prepare ourselves to live now so that we might even in real time have a future. And so I wanted to talk today about negotiating the now, because in the midst of all that we have, it is one thing that is true, that we cannot do anything unless we deal with what is happening right here before our eyes. So today's message is about that. How do you deal with the things that are happening in your life right now? Instead of going back, well, this is the way it used to be, or I wish we could go back to those days. Someone said to me just this week that if you don't negotiate the now, they didn't use these words, but if you don't get with it, you're going to get left behind. And I wanted to protest and say, no, not really. If you keep going in the direction you're going to go in, you won't have a future at all, because you'll be off the cliff. Because there are some things that are changeless about life. It's okay to change with changing times, but you can't change changeless things in order to suit changing times. I just said something. That's pretty good, wasn't it? I'll say it again. It's okay to negotiate and change with changeless times, with changing times, but you can't change the changeless things in order to deal with changeless time, or to accommodate changeless times. In our lives, we have found that negotiating our now is a balancing act of realizing, like in the Sankofa Adinkra, reminding us, like Western West African culture, that it's okay to move forward as long as you keep a good eye on where you've come from. And in the midst of negotiating our now, we have to first be aware of our then. So I'll say that. In order to negotiate your now, you have to be really clear eyed and really honest about how you had to negotiate your then. What has happened in our past does not mean that we have to relive it, but we have to really be aware of it. We have to pay attention of how we negotiated our then. What choices did we make? Which direction did we go in? What friends did we connect ourselves to? What enemies that we made out of people that were not our enemies? What experiences that we have that we could have learned from and that we should have learned from? In other words, in order to negotiate our now, we have to remember how we negotiated our then. And getting our finger on that, or being able to put our finger on the pulse of our negotiating our then we can assess how we have really effectively made some mistakes and how we've made some improvements. So I bring it home to you. How have you changed over time? How have you negotiated your then in order to be able to learn from it in your now? Well, I'm convinced that there are stories like this all the time. Some of them biblical stories, some of the stories we had. When I was a little kid, they used to tell the story of the grasshopper and the ant. And the ant would work all the time, all the way through the summer months and enjoying nothing about the summer, but always working, preparing for the fall, stirring up food that would be there for the winter. While the grasshopper hopped around and enjoyed himself and enjoyed the lake and all those sorts of things. We would see that in the cartoons when we were growing up with. They were always trying to teach us something. May not have been most tasteful or appropriate for kids, but they taught us so much. And in those moments, they taught us this old fable in real time that you have to prepare for winter even while you're in the middle of your summer, which brings me to the next thing I want to say. In order to negotiate our now, not only do we have to remember how we negotiated our then, but we have to be able to look forward to putting things in place so we can negotiate our future. In other words, negotiate our next. You negotiate your last, but you have to negotiate your next. And what you do right now determines how you're going to be successful in negotiating the next thing in your life. What friends will you have? What relationships are going to be important? What choices do you need to make so that when your tomorrow comes, if it does come, that you're positioned well for it? And that is what I would like to share with us, because as a chaplain, certainly, and as a minister, I want to say to you that the one who created you knows everything about your then, your now, and your next. And so that when you move towards your next thing, whatever that is, God, your creator, has already built into your now the preparation necessary for your next. And so that be aware. Don't just go along around things just for self gratification or the right now immediate gratification of what's happening now, but be reminded that your future, your next, is dependent on what choices you make in this moment right here. So I want to share with you, and I'm going to close out with this message because I think it's important for me to do so. There was this story. It's a biblical story. I love biblical stories, so that I want to share this with you. It's one from what we some call the Old Testament, but it is a very, very important story to kind of pick up. That while there was a king of Israel, he found himself faced with a dilemma. He had tried to be a good king. He tried to do all that he could. But in the midst of trying to be a good king, there came a time for him to pass on. The message came to him right in the middle of his prime to say, hey, prepare yourself. You're not going to get better. You're going to be sick and you're not going to live. And so prepare yourself, get your house in order. And at that point, this particular king turns his face to the wall and he weeps and he cries and he shares with God, God, I am really in a place where I've tried to do the best I can, and I'm trying to live my life in such a way that would be pleasing to you. And then while he was yet praying and yet crying and talking to God, the prophet comes back to him after delivering this bad, very difficult message. I won't say bad, but this challenging message. And when he comes back to him, he discovers in the middle of that that the message has changed. You'll live 15 more years. And the mark of that is, what are you going to do with the extra 15 years in your future? I won't go into the story much more, but I invite you to think about what it is, what happened if right now, today, if your life was called in and you had to give up everything that you are, that it was time to leave the life that you had. And in the middle of that, God says to you in your now, while you're negotiating it, with thanksgiving and a plea that you've done everything that you could in the life that you've given. If God gives you more time, if God gives you extra time, what will you do with it in your future? I would suggest that we all take time to negotiate our now, informed by how we negotiated our then, so that we can prepare for negotiating our future or our next. I don't know what your next looks like. I'm not sure what the next day will look like for any of us, or the next week, or what will happen in the world next, or what will happen, in the country next. But what I do know is that in the middle of these moments in which you're negotiating, it doesn't have to be everybody's doing the same thing, but it's your life. It's the one life you're given. How are you going to negotiate it? How are you going to deal with it? Frankly, how are you going to live in your now? Thank you so much for giving us your time today. I hope this message was inspiring and encouraging and thought provoking a little bit. I am encouraged that everything in my now has already been prepared for by my then. And when I'm here, I can live comfortably in it, and I can prepare for what is next in my life with a confidence that my Creator knows already where I'm going, what I will experience, and what I'll need when I get there. And so I don't have to kind of fret about it. I kind of know that as I negotiate the now, I'll do that in light of what I'm being encouraged to do from my Creator. So I hope that you're in the same place. Today, I want you to know that you're loved, you're appreciated, and you're irreplaceable. And because of that, you have something to give to the rest of the world right now. Give it. It won't hurt you. The more you give, the more God gives to you. Just keep on giving, because it's really true. You can't beat God giving no matter how you try. And we're not talking about money, but we're talking about the fruit of your life: friendship, love, care for community, support for one another, peace of mind. Yes, all those things matter in this world. Have a great one. Have a great day. Have a great week. Yeah, indeed. Have a great life. Take care. Bye.